Morning.
Good. Oh, didn't know. Oh, I'm live. Good morning. That's the time I'm muted. So
How you doing today?
good. How about you?
Good so far. What kind of dog do you have?
We have a blue heeler.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that one.
She's a Australian cattle dog.
Oh, cool. All
Very
right.
high energy, and I'm about this far from being too old to keep up with her.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, we have a little terrier mix of some kind that we've had for a long time, and she is just a sweetheart. She's tiny, 10 pounds or 11 pounds.
Yeah, I just took Sadie. She's 40 pounds. We just took her to the vet this morning to have her spayed. So
Oh, wow.
she's just turning a year old.
Wow, that's great. Well, I don't think we're going to get another dog. I think this is it at this point. We've had them for years, and as we're getting older, we find that we travel a lot more, and constantly just putting her in boarding, it just seems dumb to me. I mean, she just spent 10 days there like 2 weeks ago, and now she's going to spend another 2 weeks.
Oh,
It's just she loves it there. She's the queen of the place. They don't even put her in her cage. She just wanders around and does whatever she wants. So they all really like her. So I don't feel too guilty, but it just seems kind of crazy to pay that kind of money and not even,
enjoy her at home.
it doesn't make any sense. So hey, Gail, how are you?
Morning. Good. How are you, everybody? Hopefully you had a good weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, good morning.
Renate is running around after some dog that she has that so if she falls asleep during the class, you'll know what happened.
Yeah, she's a mess. She's a good girl, but whoo, we've raised boxers before, and we thought, well, we've had high energy dogs. This won't be bad, but she's much more high energy.
Interesting. Well,
It's
I don't
good.
know.
When she gets older, she'll be calmer.
Maybe. That's what they always say, right?
Yeah, we went to Pinehurst Saturday.
Oh, cool. Did you play golf?
No, we had got to be NC North Carolina Barbecue Festival.
Well, it shows you how much I know. Was it fun?
Yeah, we sold barbecue sauce. And,
Wow.
Wayne was beside of us, and Ruth, she was across the way from us.
Oh, great.
Has she bought something from us? Yeah. Went down and asked for us. Did the festival.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we
Hey, Allison. Hey, John.
Morning.
Hey, Sugared Spoon. Good morning.
Hey.
Everyone doing okay?
Yeah.
All
Doing
right.
great. Hope you are.
Yeah, I missed the barbecue show, apparently. but I live so far out here, it would have taken me forever to get there anyway. So, but I'm glad it worked well. That were there a lot of consumers there?
Yes. I don't know that there was as many this year as what they were last year. It's kind of hard to gauge because it has grown. This is the first year we sold. Didn't sell like I wanted to sell, but I've got barbecue sauce and there's 50 more barbecue sauces. So I really didn't expect to be a high seller. If I don't sell a lot, I don't ever consider it a flop because there may be someone there that I've met that may be good in the future.
Yeah.
And it's always more money in your pocket than you came with.
Right. And there was a free booth and
Oh, that's good.
they didn't take any of our profits and
That's good.
let's go see what it's all about. But it is if you're with Carolina Packing, you get to be a part of the competition. We're not with Carolina Packing, so we were excluded from the competition, which is fine. But if you win the competition, you get a year's guarantee to have your product at Lowe's Foods.
Oh wow.
Wow.
Huh. Well, is Carolina Packing a co-packer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, cool. Hey,
So they
Denise, how are you?
had 50 contestants there, just barbecue sauce.
Man,
Carolina Packing.
well, I'm a big fan of barbecue sauce, and it's kind of hard to go wrong. Good morning, Grant. How are you? Are you alive?
Barely, Dennis.
All right, hang on there with both hands.
Oh,
Never give up, right?
Yes, sir.
Unless you're the kicker for ECU against NC State, that guy might want to give up. I don't know.
Yeah, he's in witness protection right now.
Oh, that poor guy. I feel so bad. I'm glad it's not my son. One of the guys that when I was at JMU, he was right after me, but he was kind of a big deal. He was the kicker for the football team, and he also had been the kicker in my hometown. And he turned out to be Scott Norwood, who missed the field goal in the Super Bowl for the Buffalo Bills. And so, as good as he was, you're as a kicker, you're always remembered by your misses for the most part. So, okay, well, welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about category design. And some of you are familiar with it, and some of you aren't. It's a kind of a different way of thinking about your product or service. And one of the things that you'll learn from this is the benefits of creating your own category, if you will, and how you go about doing that. And I think you'll enjoy this. So I always enjoy it. So let's give it a shot. Hopefully it'll work. Hopefully my internet won't go out. We've had a lot of problems lately for some reason. Okay. So here we go.
So I want to walk you through the basic ideas about what category design is all about and how to think that way and how to take your company in that direction if that's something you want to do. So this is basically an overview, but some behind the scenes stuff about the book too. Just want to start out with a few reasons why it's important to think this way. And so one is everybody in this room probably knows and feels that it's way easier to start a company today than it was 20 years ago. Grab a laptop and a credit card, get on AWS, join up with somebody like Techstars. A couple people can have a company up and running in no time that can compete with the giants of the world. But what that means is that if anybody has a really interesting idea in an interesting new space, it quickly looks like this, with 1,000 other companies piling in to do what you're already trying to do. So it becomes really hard to stand out unless you are establish yourselves as some kind of a leader a thought leader, a category king in a particular space. And another reason to try to go for this idea of category king and category creation is that in any market that's really that's digital, it's a winner-take-all kind of situation. And you can measure that any way you want. Market share, you look at on-demand transportation, and Uber is the obvious category king in this space. It takes 73% of the market share, Lyft 23%. And so market value is another way you could measure it. And Airbnb in particular space worth $30-some billion. When HomeAway was sold, it was worth about $4 billion. Whether it's, you measure it by total usage in the space of online storage, Dropbox.
Well, one thing I do want to say here is that if I'm only valued at 4 billion, that's okay with me. Okay. So the mentality of a lot of this is this so-called winner take all and, publicly traded, venture funded and all that. Ignore all that bullshit. The markets are, there are actually lots of places where these things can work. And I have personally spent most of my career, if you want to call it that, basically copying things that work at this high level and bringing them to small rural areas, which I've done for 25 years, and it works fine. So just keep in mind, if you're only worth 4 billion, I'll still talk to you. Okay.
Kind of identified the category and came to dominate it. And even with all of Google's power and capabilities, it still only has 70% of the usage of this kind of online storage space. And another interesting reason for wanting to be a category king is the category kings tend to attract the best people. And here's a way we know about this. About a year ago, LinkedIn decided to do a study using its data to try to figure out what were the 25 companies that the most talented people in the world want to work for. And when a little background story on this, when LinkedIn wanted to do this study, they ran the data, but they also brought in a woman named Susie Welch to analyze the data and write about it. Now, Susie Welch is a pretty famous business journalist. She used to be the editor of Harvard Business Review. She also happens to be married to Jack Welch, who was the former CEO of General Electric and also kind of a business character in his own right. And so we didn't even really know about this project. And then one of my co-authors, Al Ramadan, got a call one day from Susie Welch saying, we're doing this study, and I happen to have been reading your book. And I noticed that if you map the companies that are landing on that list of the ones people want to work for to the idea of category kings, most of the companies on the list are identifiably category kings. And she wanted to talk to us about the dynamics and why that was. But towards the end of the interview, Al thought he'd ask, he says to Susie, well, how did you end up running across our book? And this was one of my favorite things I ever heard about the book was she said, well, my husband's Jack Welch. And I was like, yeah, I know who Jack Welch is. And she said, well, Jeff Bezos gave your book to my husband and said, you should read this. And then my husband gave it to me and said, you should read this. So that's apparently we're floating around in some pretty high, stratospheric circles there. But the bottom line here is that is also a really good reason to want to identify yourself as this category king. So I wanted to walk you back a little bit because this is not something that was just based on anecdotal evidence or just our particular instincts. When we started this project, we really wanted to back it up with some real data and background information. I'll walk you through this crazy chart here. We took data from thousands of venture-backed companies and just ran it and asked a whole lot of questions of this data and trying to just see what kind of patterns we could get out of it. And we ran across this one thing that we thought was kind of interesting, but we didn't quite know what it meant, but we'll get to that in a second. But what this ends up showing is that when we looked at the value created by venture-backed companies after they went public, post-IPO value. We noticed that this pattern that if companies that went public before they were 6 years old, the trend line basically had them dropping in value from IPO time to after the post-IPO value tended to go negative. Companies that went public between 6 and 10 years old created enormous post-IPO value. And companies that went public after they were 10 years old tended to basically flatline. Didn't really lose value, they didn't really excite anybody either. And we wondered what this meant. We took it to places like Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan, the investment bankers there, and we said, we showed them this, and they said, this matches our instincts, this matches what we see. We never ran the data, but actually it's really interesting that, this kind of proves out, but kind of makes sense to us. But they didn't know why this was happening either. So we went searching, and we ran the next step when we asked why this was happening. Oh, by the way, yeah, here's just as a little reminder of that 6 to 10, some of the biggest successes. Facebook went public at 8 years, Amazon at 8 years, Salesforce at 6. Uber in 2018 is 9 years old, so it suggests that if they go public in a year and a half, just don't buy the stock. So we asked, why is this happening? And that led us to the work of an economist named Paul Gorosky. And Paul Gorosky studied category life cycles. And he ended up creating this very simple chart that has 2 steps to it, and I'll walk you through each one. So the first step is and this makes intuitive sense if you think about it. When a new category gets identified, and you're down here basically, and one company or 2 companies figure out that there's some new invention, some new cool thing to do, there's hardly any companies in a space. As soon as, think back to that chart with a zillion companies on it, as soon as it starts to be identified that it's interesting space, zillions of companies jump in, right? You get this spike in the number of companies in the space, and then you get this time period when the number of companies starts to drop off because 1 or 2 kings solidify. They either acquire some of the other companies in the space or the other companies go out of business. And so the number of companies in that category starts to fall into a smaller number. And then over time, it kind of flatlines. It kind of stabilizes at a few companies that are dominating that space. The other half of the curve goes like this, which is when a category is created, obviously it's worth pretty much nothing. And it takes a while for people to get the idea and it starts to have some real value to that category. And then all of a sudden it catches on and it spikes. The total value of that category starts to spike. And over time it matures and levels off. So Gorosky put these together and created this chart of what a category life cycle looks like. And as you can imagine, the value is still climbing. The number of companies pile in, even though the value is not there. Suddenly the category catches on, king emerges, and it consolidates. But the category is actually taking off now and spiking. And then you get to some place where there's 2 or 3 companies dominating, and the category is pretty much mature and flatlining. And as you can probably tell, when you look at that chart and you say, well, that kind of overlaps to this. And it makes some sense because in this particular phase, the category is very uncertain and who's going to be the king is very uncertain. So you get situations like Groupon going public when it was 3 years old, and you've got a category that looked really promising but ended up not being so promising, and a company that went public at a huge valuation and ended up tanking afterwards. In this particular time period, you end up with 1 or 2 companies emerging that seem like they're going to be the obvious kings of this spiking category, and investors are very excited. That's when you want to put money in a company, and so the value starts to climb because it's got a lot of upside. And then in this last phase over here, what tends to happen is that as the category sort of matures and flatlines and the number of players consolidates, it's all of the excitement is out of it. It's just basically a mature stock at play at that point. So that's why when companies go public when they're late, it doesn't do bad, it doesn't do good. It's just that all of the information is already there, right? You're not really investing in something that's going to spike. So we still, we're asking the question of, but why is that happening? Why do those time frames make sense? And that led us to brain science, of all things. And I had a role in this because this is a book that I wrote, came out in 2011, that was about the intersection of brain science and computer science and how those two fields were learning from each other. And by doing this book, it plugged me into the neuroscience community. And of course, we were big fans of Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is all about our brains and how they work and the biases that we have inside of our brains. And so I took the data and the research we had done to a few of my neuroscience friends and said, like, what does this mean to you? Like, how does this map to anything that you understand? And they said, absolutely, it does. And they started talking to us about the cognitive biases in our brains. And cognitive biases are these things in our brains that make us make decisions that are not based on logic. We actually don't make decisions based on facts. We make decisions based on these biases that get embedded in our brains. And there's some 50 of them. Like one is the choice supportive bias, which just means that if you buy a particular product, you tend to think it's the best product because you were so smart because you bought it. It's just out of a flywheel that goes around. And groupthink is what it sounds like. We tend to be influenced by what people think around us. And these biases influence our decisions in a very, very meaningful way. So there's another aspect of things that the neuroscience were talking to us about, and this leads us back to some of the category conversation, that when there's too much choice, when there's a lot of stuff out there, our brains categorize things. And that's why, for instance, when you go in the grocery store, it's not arranged alphabetically. It's arranged by categories, because that's how you think. And you want to go in and you want to find the spaghetti sauce, and you go to the aisle where the spaghetti sauce is, and then you make the choice out of a bunch of things that are on the shelf. Interestingly, in business, a line item on a budget is essentially a category. And that's how, again, we think when we run a company. We need, I know I need some public relations, for my company. And then you think, what's the company that's the most, the dominant one, or the one that, is most important for me to engage in that category. So a winning category strategy actually creates a new line item. If you're a B2B company, creates a new line item on somebody's budget. And so when we create these categories in our minds, and our biases tend to put one or two category kings in that space. When you go to the spaghetti sauce aisle, you probably think there's a spaghetti sauce that you think is the best one or the best value for you to buy, and it's already in your brain. You're not going to go there every time and stare at every one and read the ingredients and look at the prices and decide which one to buy. And here's some, just some categories that are, we pretty obviously have category kings in, and they establish themselves in our minds as those kings. And so once we have those, established as those winners in categories, those biases tend to keep them there. So what that all comes back to is the idea that if you're the CEO of a company, one of your jobs is to actually exploit these brain shortcuts. It's actually to condition our minds and make us have those biases in our brains, and so that you can be seen as this category king and embed people in people's brains. And the back end of this that we got from as we talked to the neuroscience folks, is that it takes sustained effort. It's not something that happens with one TV commercial on a Super Bowl. It happens by over and over emphasizing that particular product and that brand and in convincing people that space exists and that you're the king in it. And if you think of the bell curve of the population, you're going to capture some of those early adopters, in those first couple of years. But what happens is that to get to the heart and the meat of the bell curve of what you're trying to influence actually takes that sustained effort over some 6 to 10 years. And that's why we end up with these kinds of time frames that tend to work for any industry, any consumer products, business to business products. It seems to be This is how fast the majority of people's minds can move. So as a CEO or a company founder, I mean, basically, you know, what it comes down to is maybe your most important job is to condition people's brains. This is Steve Jobs conditioning our brains. And when he got up on stage, this is classic Steve Jobs, when he got up on stage to introduce the iPad, he literally got up and he said, "We are creating a new category of product." And he said, you know, we have this new age of digital media. We consume this digital media. The phone is too small. The screen's too small to really enjoy, you know, video and things like that. The laptop's too big. It's too clunky. You can't really sit on your couch and lounge and do it. And so we're going to introduce this new category of product that's made for our times. It's this thing called the tablet, and our product is called the iPad. And he established the idea. We didn't know we even had that problem before Steve Jobs got up on stage and said, you know, you have this problem. And then we all go, oh yeah, actually I do have that problem. I would like to have something like that. And by identifying the category and identifying the problem, he convinced us that he had the solution because he was the only one that was smart enough to figure it out. And we go, yeah, no, I guess I do need an iPad. I'll go out and buy one, $400, great. Importantly, though, the idea is, if you think even of the Steve Jobs example, when you think about category, it's not just about the message. It's actually about what you do. It's the strategy of your company. And it informs everything about your company. And we use this chart. This is in the book. And let me explain. So, as many of you probably know very well, right? You know, when a company starts, it basically starts with product design. It's a couple of people have a good idea. We can build this thing, or we see this opportunity, and you go and you build a product, and that's what you're focused on, creating this cool new thing. And then usually the second thing that happens is, okay, I've got this cool new thing that I've created. Now I need a company to, you know, build it, sell it, do all those things that a company does. And you start thinking about what kind of company do I want to have? Where do I want to put it? What kind of people do I want to have in it? You know, what's the logo look like? All those things are designing your company. Now, I would guess that most of you and most people who ever start a company basically stop there. Got a product, we got a company, go. And what we found when we studied all of these companies was that the companies that really succeed and really blow it out have a third thing that they think about, and they think about the space they're going into and how to influence it and how to create it and how to develop that category in people's minds. And by seeing the space, by understanding what the space is and what the problem is they're going to solve, it actually comes back and influences all these other things. Because when you see this very clearly, it helps tell you what kind of product to build. And when you see this space very clearly, it helps tell you what kind of company to build. But also, it's a constant motion because whatever, you know, the product you've built and the company you've built help influence what the category is that you're looking at. But all of these pieces need to go together to help you to you know, have a really you know, forward-thinking company strategy. So if you want to do this, how do you start to think this way? The idea of looking for what's missing. And that's, you know, if you're looking at a market and it's already there and you're saying, well, that looks like a big market. This whole idea that has been around for a long time of, oh, that's a big opportunity. There's space for, you know, several winners in that particular space. That's just total bull. It's just not. It's not true in digital markets because we go back to, in digital markets, winners tend to take all. And so what you want to do is you want to look for a space that's new and that's missing. I mean, this is what Airbnb did when they got started. If you think about the story of Airbnb, these two guys in San Francisco had an apartment, a couple of designers, and there was a conference in town that all the hotels were sold out. And they thought, they didn't have much money. They thought, well, hey, we could blow up a couple of air mattresses, put them on the floor, and serve Captain Crunch in the morning, and put this on Craigslist, and maybe we'll get a couple people that would want to rent this from them. It worked. They quickly realized they thought this, and actually the whole company in the beginning was geared towards the idea of creating space when there were big conferences in town, in any particular town. But they thought realized that there was this missing thing of how do you have these sort of short-term opportunities to rent a place when hotels don't work and you don't want to have a long-term rental on something like Home Away. And they constantly saw a bigger and bigger missing as they went. But this was a new space that they created. In fact, at one point, I was at this big business conference and sat next to the CEO of Marriott, and I turned to him and I said, "Well, you guys must really hate Airbnb, don't you?" And he surprised me, and he said, "No, we don't hate them all. We don't even feel like we compete with them." He said, "We hate like Expedia and Travelocity because they take their fees take a portion of our revenue, but these guys, we don't care because they see it as a completely different space."
Okay. So, again, as I said earlier, that, just because you're only worth 4 billion and not 70 billion does not mean that was a failure. So keep in mind that backdrop with this conversation. But one of the key things here is that category design is in fact strategy, right? So you're trying to pick a strategy to go to market. And, while your product, you may feel like is already in an existing category, and it likely is, but how could you make it in some way different to stand out in a category of one, right? And that's really the mentality of this thinking. I think it's a little bit more challenging, for example, with barbecue sauce than it is with a new software platform. I get that. But that doesn't mean that, whether it's a flavor combination or a packaging thing or a partnership with somebody unrelated, that can create you, in a category by yourself. And I think it's worth a little bit of time to think that through and figure out, is that possible for you and for your product? So let me open it up to you all and kind of get your thinking on it. Anybody want to go first? Okay, Renata, you can go first. Since you volunteered. No, she's pretending like she can't unmute. Okay, there she goes.
I really
Can't
don't have
hear
a
you.
lot to say. I was just listening. But category design is extremely important. And with us selling barbecue sauce, it's like it's a, I call it kind of a flooded market. But we're very specific. And I kind of categorize us as the same thing as craft beer.
Craft barbecue sauce. I love it.
Yeah. Because, you have your higher production people like Sweet Baby Ray's, and he can go in there and sell his barbecue sauce at Food Line for $1.50. I can't do that because my co-packer is getting more than that. I mean, and so I think with us being as small as we are, I think we kind of get up there with the craft beer, at that level. I don't know how to explain that other than,
Well, I think number one, my reaction is I think that's brilliant, and I think that you've got to communicate that to your potential customers that you are in fact a craft barbecue sauce, and even if they don't know what that is, you can define it, and you can be the leader in the craft barbecue sauce category, and you can also, I think, educate people, whether it's people on your side, in the production side, or your co-packer, or even at got to be NC or NC Specialty Foods. Get them referring to you, right? Make that your tagline, or your the first craft barbecue sauce, or whatever the right wording is. But once everyone starts talking about it, it makes it much easier to bridge that gap into what you're talking about. Like I think it's brilliant personally, and I think you need to figure out how to say that in a number of ways, so that connects with people, because I do think the craft, just not to digress, but the craft brewing industry as a category has been game changing, right? When I grew up, really all you could buy was Schlitz or Budweiser. I know there were other brands, but essentially it was very limited, all basically the same. It was all pretty cheap, relatively speaking. And now all of a sudden, there's beers that are in my glass that don't even look like a beer, and they cost $10, right? So I think that they've been very successful at creating a new category, and there's lots of activity within that category, whether you're an IPA or whatever, a wheat beer, all these different things that I know nothing about. So I just encourage you to think about that and keep that in mind, and figure out how to message that would be smart. Anyone else?
I just think it's brilliant too. And then we can all say that we knew you when.
Right.
I think that could really take you far, Renata. I think that's a great thing. I think one of the things, Dennis, that I liked about this was I loved the question of looking for what's missing, and figuring out what that is that's missing, and then like honing in on that. I also liked the structure of his message, but it also made me remember that if I'm thinking finitely versus infinitely, right, then infinitely would be, it's okay that I'm 4.1 billion instead of the 31 or whatever. So I just want to tell you, thank you again for all of the content that you're sharing with us, because like it's all layering well, but I think it's helping us like think through, okay, what of this do I need and what of this do I need?
Yeah. And thank you. And that's really the intent, without, again, I don't want to go down rabbit holes, but if you look at the startup or new business, or however you want to look at it, movement or effort, entrepreneurial stuff going on in the country, the people in the tech space have a really unfair advantage in that they have all of these educational resources like Techstars and Y Combinator. The list goes on and on and on. And literally every week, another major tech accelerator opens up somewhere in the world. So these folks are exposed to all this stuff, and no one else is, right? So I felt like if I was able to get Techstars to let us use their stuff as one example, but it applies in so many ways that are way beyond technology. And and to your point, this idea of finite versus infinite, just the fact that you're thinking of a category rather than just your product, by definition, you are thinking infinitely, right? You're beyond your own specific, this is my product. And you're now starting to think about a wider context and a bigger context. And I think Renate really hit home with her thinking and her idea right off the bat. It's the craft brewery side of barbecue sauce, or however you want to phrase it. That's a perfect example of infinite thinking. And it applies to everyone here. I think that if you think about not just your product, but also, where it fits the category, and is there an opportunity to do something new in a new category? And I think there is. It just takes some time and effort, and you may not get it right the first time. But one of the things that I think is really important, and this just gets so complicated so fast, but the conversation that we just had with Renate, right, about this idea. So now she's got to figure out how to deliver that message, right? You got your label, you got your packaging, you got your materials, you got your social media, blah, blah, blah. I think it's really important to figure all that stuff out. And if you're going to be a category buster or category of one, you can't just say it to yourself. You can't just say it in this class. It's got to be, you got to figure out how to get the word out. It could be a contest where somebody wins a year's worth of craft barbecue sauce. I don't know, CRAFT, not KRAFT. So I just think that the implementation or the execution process you really have to think it through. It's almost as important. People spend a lot of time. What's the name of my company? What's the name of my product? They go through all of this stuff in torture. But I would argue that this sort of thing is every bit as important, and maybe more important, because you're talking about dealing with potential buyers of your product or service. This concept of product market fit, the idea that you figure out who your tribe is, who your buyers, who your people are, and you get the velocity, you get the increase. We're all looking for that, and it may come in a surprising way. This conversation today, to me, I did not wake up this morning thinking about, craft barbecue sauce. It's just not something that, I never would have thought about. So that's a perfect example of cutting through the crap with I get it. I got it immediately. It makes a lot of sense. And you may end up doing something else. I'm not trying to say that's the be all and end all, but this is what I'm talking about. This is an example of the kind of thinking and the kind of conversation. And then you got to have a game plan. How are you going to make that message so that, your potential audience and everyone in your universe, all your co-packer, I mentioned the NC Specialty Food, all of these people all have to get on I call it singing from the same hymnal, right? They all got to be singing from the same hymnal. And every time it comes up, it's reiterated. I think Renate made the point to me before most of you came on today that she participated in the Got to Be NC barbecue thing in Pinehurst yesterday. And she said there were 50 barbecue sauces, right? So there's a sensation that, God, there's so many, right? But I think with this kind of thinking and this kind of brand positioning, I think you can cut through and probably, end up competing with 3 or 4 instead of 50. That's my belief anyway. So anyone else want to jump in here? I do want to recognize Samantha, who's on here. I'm sorry, someone.
Yeah, Dennis, this is John.
Hey, John, sorry, I didn't see you on the screen. My fault.
No problem. Just wanted to throw my 2 cents in. What you just were talking about, and also Renata and Denise brought up really, really great points, I think. With our business being dip mixes, I actually started the business 12 years ago just as a weekend project, going out and selling other companies' products. And one of the things that was really missing in that category was the customer service and quick turnaround time. And that's how we have really built the following we have today, because our distributors usually go out and do a show every weekend. So when they put in an order on Sunday night for the next weekend, they've got to have that product before the next weekend. And
Yeah.
we've prided ourselves in the fact that we get the order out the next day, and they have it in plenty of time for their show the following weekend. And the larger companies just don't do that. It takes them maybe two or three weeks to get an order to you.
Yep.
So that's just one way that you can make your product stand out, just to go on the extra mile as far as customer service. And then we also allow them to do private labeling, which most companies don't do, and we actually teach them how to make their own labels. So it's just another way of helping people.
Well, I think, thank you, John, for sharing that. It really brings up a point that I think you need to think about. So, one of the things we get focused on, especially when we're small, we get focused on our packaging, our product name, all that kind of stuff. But what John just talked about there has nothing to do with any of that, right? It has to do with customer service, being responsive, fixing a problem that's in that space. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, think about this for 1 second, right? Walmart as a company is obviously huge and dominant in many, many ways. But the thing that I found so interesting, and this was years ago, this dawned on me, Walmart stores are ugly as hell, right? There's nothing nice about a Walmart store, in my opinion, certainly compared to the way I grew up, which is you go to Bloomingdale's or Macy's, something like that. That's nice, right? So the idea was, you had to have a really nice store. Well, Walmart proved you don't even have to have a halfway decent looking store. You just have to have logistics that put stuff on the shelf cheap and have lots of locations where people can find it. I mean, their business model is all about what's behind the scenes, not what's visible, right? Their logistics, their warehouses, their systems and processes, they're unmatched in that way. I would argue Amazon is going down the same path in that sense. But that's something that you and I probably never would have thought of. Let's build a really ugly store full of cheap crap and we'll become billionaires, right? It just seems illogical. But to John's point, I think, finding out what needs to be done in your space that maybe solves problems for customers that go beyond, what the traditional kind of approach to design and aesthetics and pricing and all that kind of stuff. So I thank you, John, for sharing that. And I think, John has been very successful with his business, and this is the type of thinking that I think he's applied that have helped him be successful. So I appreciate you sharing that, John. Anyone else want to go into business with me, building a really ugly store in a remote location with a huge parking lot where people live in RVs and buses? What a business. Who would have thought of that, right? Okay. All right. Well, that's really all I have for today. We're going to cover the second half of this tomorrow. So get your category design thinking going. And it'd be interesting to think about, what category can you either, get in one that's not very populated, or is there one that you can create or be a part of? I think we discovered here that Renate is going to create a new category of barbecue sauce, and I think that's really cool. So I'll see everyone tomorrow at 9:30. Thank you. Bye-bye.